Hey you, yeah, you. You're from somewhere, right? Yeah, thought so. Don't ask how I knew. I'm just like that. I know things. And just like you, Dead by Daylight's roster of survivors, if you would believe it, all come from somewhere too. I know, shocking stuff. And so, because I am a huge flag nerd and I really wanted a reason to do a video that would have lots of cool flags in it, today we're going to look at all of Dead by Daylight survivors and talk about where they're from. Before we get going, I'd like to make a few exceptions, mainly in that I'm not going to talk about legendary skins that turn survivors into different characters. There are a few reasons for this, but the main one is that the legendary skins tend to be from the same place, and even if it's not, there's really no way of knowing. There's also the issue of there being half a bajillion Silent Hill skins, and the last thing I want is a pack of rabid Konami fans in my comments letting me know that, actually, this character was a dog the whole time, and he works out of this control room, but he actually comes from a shelter in Zimbabwe, so you're wrong, food. It's a complicated series, and honestly, I'm just not gonna touch all that. There's also the issue of some Resident Evil characters, and by some, I mean Sheva and exclusively Sheva. Sure, we have a general idea of where she's from. Just some little plot of land called Africa. Some sources even narrow it down to West Africa, as if that doesn't leave the door open for her to be from one of like 19 or 20 countries. So yeah, where's Sheva from? Africa. Where in Africa? Africa. Seems like that's all we're gonna get on that front. Thankfully, Sheva's a bit of an outlier, and we can fairly accurately pinpoint where everybody else is from. So please, take a seat, get cozy, and let's rattle off where all of our best friends from the fog come from. We'll start this out with the largest category by far, that of course being the land of bald eagles, mountains with faces on them, and more SEC championships than the rest of the world combined. This is the land of both Hollywood and Dollywood, the place with an undefeated record in world wars, and a much less desirable record in every other kind of war. A place where we take everyone else's ideas and add a heavy dose of freedom to them. I am of course talking about the US of A, and given the size and media footprint of the country, it probably won't surprise you to know that out of Dead by Daylight's 36 survivors, 19 of them call the United States home. Now, for some, that's about all we know. Specifically, we only know that Dwight and Michaela are from the US, but we don't know which state exactly. Just going off the results of a quick vibe check, I'm going to say with oddly great confidence that Dwight is from somewhere in the Midwest. Let's say somewhere like Omaha, Nebraska. And Michaela is from Portland, Oregon. Until further notice, I'm accepting these as their canonical origins, and I will hear no argument otherwise. Then we have Resident Evil characters like Jill, Leon, and Rebecca, who are all listed as being from Raccoon City. Interestingly, Raccoon City, which is obviously not a real place, was created by Japanese developers, and its skyline is actually based off of Montreal, Quebec's, which is, not in the United States. Despite this, Resident Evil is very consistent about saying that Raccoon City is somewhere in the American Midwest. Given what we've seen of Raccoon City in various games, I'm just going to create headcanon that the games exist in a timeline where South Dakota's population exploded and Raccoon City helped them secure the status of Best Dakota. It's worth noting, however, that while Rebecca is just described as being American, Leon comes from Italian heritage and Jill comes from a French father and a Japanese mother. As for Ada, our last Resi character, we know that she's an American of Chinese heritage, but as you should expect from a character whose entire shtick is that she's mysterious and unknowable, we have no idea what state she was actually born in. There are a few others that require some guesswork, so let's address those now. Firstly, we have the case of Detective David Tapp, who technically operates within an unnamed fictional city in the Saw franchise, but for the sake of this video, we're going to use clues from the films to assign him a real-life home. Some have said that the films look like they take place in Seattle, which, yikes, what did Seattle ever do to you? But I'm actually going to choose New Jersey. Why? Because the license plates in the early films are Jersey plates, and I don't think that the Seattle and Newark police departments are sharing rides. Tapp isn't the only character who likely calls the Garden State home, as Jane Romero's lore mentions that her father lives in New Jersey as well. We know that she was abandoned by her mother at a young age, so it's pretty fair to assume that Jane is from New Jersey. I mean, it's possible that her father moved to Jersey sometime later in Jane's life, but this is the only bit of information we really have to go off of, so I'm gonna run with it. Staying in the Northeast, we have another highly speculative one, that being that Bill Overbeck is from Pennsylvania. Left 4 Dead fans reason that he likely lives near the Philadelphia area due to his knowledge of its roads and neighborhoods in the first game, but that's admittedly not a slam dunk case. Still, it's better than nothing, so for the time being, I'm happy enough to accept it. Another speculative one, and this is the last one, I kinda sorta promise, is Cheryl Mason. For this one, I defaulted to the internet since I know almost nothing about Silent Hill, and Google told me that people believe Silent Hill is likely based in Maine. Is this true? I don't know, but it's good enough for me. With all the work Stephen King has done to make beautiful Maine into a horror hotspot, it would be a shame if no DBD characters called the Pine Tree stayed home, so sure, Cheryl's from Maine. From here on out, we thankfully know with great certainty where every US-based character is from, with some of them even giving us the exact city. Laurie Strode, of course, hails from the iconic yet entirely fictitious town of Haddonfield, Illinois, which is cool because my brother lives in Illinois these days, and I never once thought to warn him about Michael Myers. I'm sure he'll be fine. Hopefully, he doesn't end up in the fog, though if he does, I guess I have a new main. Like, I guess I have to, right? Another fictional Rust Belt city pops up on this list, as Steve and Nancy from Stranger Things are both from Hawkins, Indiana. And I know I said I wouldn't mention Legendary Cosmetics, but in the name of kindness, sure, let's mention that Jonathan Byers is also from Hawkins. Not that it has anything to do with this list, but I do find it strange, I guess, that 2 of Indiana's most famous cities, Hawkins from Stranger Things and Pawnee from Parks and Rec, are entirely fictional. For a gorgeous but pretty unassuming state, it's kind of fun that 2 popular shows just decided to be based there. If you thought we were done with the Rust Belt, which, by the way, is these states in case you weren't aware, you couldn't be more wrong. Not only is Ashley J. Williams a proud native of Michigan, but Quentin Smith comes from Springwood, Ohio. I love the thought of these 2 getting together to watch Ohio State play Michigan in the game every year, even though I'm pretty sure Ash is actually loyal to the Michigan State Spartans if we are to go off of his girlfriend's sweater in the first film. Still, it's a nice thought. Oh, and for those curious, Springwood is yet another fictional city set in a real state, so no, it's not possible to visit the quote-unquote actual Elm Street. That being said, there are over 5,200 Elm Streets in the US, so if you really want to visit one, it's not that hard. One final Rust Belt entry here, and that's Kate Denson, who honestly doesn't really fit the vibe of her own home state. Her whole thing is that she's a country music star, so you might have expected her to be from Tennessee, Florida, or Texas, or I don't know, some other, another heavily country state. But nope, Kate's lore lays it out clear as day when it says, quote, her mother did everything she could to fulfill Kate's dreams, taking her all over their home state of Pennsylvania. This is a bit of a bummer to me because as somebody from the South, I'd love to have a character to claim, but there actually aren't any Southern survivors in Dead by Daylight. Luckily, the killers were kinder to us and we got Hag, Hillbilly, and Bubba, which means the translation should be that Behavior thinks everybody from the American South is a murderous cannibal. Neat. They're not wrong, but they didn't have to say it. Tangents about the South aside, it's time to take this act to the Big Apple and check in on Zarina Kassir. Her spot on this list may surprise you given that Zarina's Lebanese heritage is a massive part of who she is as a character, but her lore is explicit that Zarina was born and raised in the Brooklyn borough of New York City, making her an American. That said, she's rather important to the game at the time being, seeing as though she is literally the only character with clear Middle Eastern heritage at the moment, which, yeah, I don't know, I think that's kind of surprising. Finally, we head out west for our final 2 Americans, those being Meg Thomas and Jonah Vasquez. If you read through Meg's lore, specifically the tome titled Eat Dust, it clearly states that Meg is from the Centennial State, Colorado. We don't know where in Colorado she is from, but it seems like Meg is from a small town part of the state and not somewhere more populated like Denver or Colorado Springs. As for Jonah, he's from nearby sunny California. It can be deduced that he spent substantial time in Fresno, California, but we don't know for sure that he was born there. All we know is that he is an American from California. But for all we know, he could have come from anywhere in the Golden State because, as you know, it's a pretty big state with a lot of people. After going through 19 Americans, you may be surprised to know that the next closest country in terms of representation is a 4-way tie between countries that all bring 2 survivors to the table. Out of the 4, we'll stay in the Americas and head to the true north, strong and free. A land of gorgeous glacial vistas, awe-inspiring wildlife, and a disproportionately large number of professional wrestlers, for some reason. They gave us poutine, hockey, and one of the most aesthetically pleasing flags on planet Earth. I am, of course, talking about Canada. Now, Canada doesn't have nearly as many survivors as one might expect. Behavior Interactive is based out of Canada, after all, so an emphasis on Canuck survivors would have been understandable, but no, there are only 2. Those survivors are Claudette Morel and Jeff Johansson. Claudette is Quebecois and grew up in Montreal before leaving her hometown to attend college elsewhere. Jeff, meanwhile, is a based Albertan and grew up in the town of Ormond. After doing some digging, it would seem that Ormond, Alberta does not exist, but there is such a thing as Ormond, Ontario. You could always visit that Ormond if you'd like, but for my money, I'd rather just hang out in Alberta, which is probably the most beautiful part of Canada, though that's pretty hard to say because most of Canada is just exceptionally gorgeous. A person can't talk about beautiful countries without hitting this next place, however. This is the land where Earth's devs set resource spawn to abundant. A land where they cram more biodiversity into one river than most of us can fit into an entire country. This is the place of Samba, Carnival, mega dedicated football fans, and Fast Five, which, as I'm reading this, I'm realizing probably isn't as noteworthy as the other things on that list. The country is beautiful, magnificent Brazil, and the survivors are Thalita and Renatu. Now, we don't know for sure where the siblings are from, and I don't know if you're much of a cartography buff, but last time I checked, Brazil is fairly large. Even still, I actually think we might be able to narrow down where Thalita and Renatu come from. DBD tends to like for their survivors and killers to be in some way connected, and these two released alongside the Skull Merchant. Adriana is from Fortaleza, Brazil, a real city this time, by the way, and that would add up with the lore photos of Thalita and Renatu flying kites on the beach. That said, it's also possible they're from somewhere maybe more populated like Sao Paulo, which would have made 1,000 times more sense for the Skull Merchant, seeing as though she's of Japanese heritage, and Sao Paulo is literally the largest haven for Japanese immigrants on planet Earth. And while we're on the subject of Japan, let's talk about the land of the rising sun. What can be said about Japan that hasn't already been said? There is no culture on Earth quite like what the Japanese have built, and it should be no surprise that some people find themselves rather infatuated with this one-of-a-kind island nation. Famed predominantly for cherry blossom trees, insanely plentiful vending machines, and of course, the ever-popular anime and manga, Japan also has a rich technological history. Part of that history is the country's pivotal role in the development of video games, so it should be no surprise that a game like Dead by Daylight would want to show Japan some love. Yui Kimura was the first Japanese character to be added to the game, being released alongside the Oni in the Cursed Legacy chapter. Yui comes from Hida, a small town of only about 25,000 residents in Japan's Gifu prefecture, and for once, we have a character with a real-world location to call home. Yoichi Asakawa is also Japanese, but it's tougher to decide where exactly he's from. We know he went to university in Tokyo, but the original Ringu film seems set somewhere far less densely populated, so he's probably not from Tokyo. I couldn't find where exactly he's from, but what I did find was this hilariously bizarre clip of Sadako throwing a first pitch at a baseball game. I don't know. Again, I love Japan. We don't have to go far from Japan to find our next, and for now, final country with 2 or more survivors. All we have to do is cross the Korea Strait and fittingly end up in South Korea, a land famous for world-class cuisine, a burgeoning cinema industry, and, well, other things. And while 3 of the original 4 survivors were North American, there was one exception, that being Jake Park, who calls the land of the morning calm home. We don't know the exact city he's from. His tome lore just says that he, quote, remembers backpacking across Korea, so there's really not much to go off of with that. 5 years after Jake's release, we got another South Korean survivor, this one being the ruthless and, let's be honest, amazing Yunjin Lee. Again, we aren't entirely sure where Yunjin calls home, but her lore mentions at a certain point that she and Ji-woon, the trickster, went, quote, back to Seoul. So it's possible that she's from the capital city, which would prove befitting of a woman with so much drive and ambition. A person can really make something of themselves in Seoul, so it wouldn't be surprising at all if that's where Yunjin cut her teeth. From here on out, every country listed is going to be a one-off, for now. There could always be a new chapter added in the future that changes how many people are from these countries, but for the time being, consider them DBD's one-hit wonders. Out of all the countries with only a solo outing, I want to start with Italy. Now, Italy is an amazing country in every sense of the word, and there's really not enough I could say to do this place justice. Like most people, I absolutely adore Italian food, and on top of that, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that doesn't like the sound of the Italian language. There's also apparently some little town called Rome there, which I don't know, must have been important at some point in time, but who knows. The reason I'm starting with Italy is because while there's only a single survivor from there, that being Vittorio Toscano, another two survivors, Leon and Ace, have Italian roots. So while technically Europe's favorite boot only has one survivor officially, they can kind of claim three if they'd like. We will keep it in Europe and hammer out some other one-offs, and specifically, I'd like to highlight what may well be my favorite European country, that being Germany. The Bavarian mountains, the rich beer culture, the architecture on display in towns like Heidelberg, there's a lot to like about Germany. My favorite aspect of Deutschland, however, is the language, which contrary to its reputation, I find to be absolutely just music to my ears. Which is fitting because few areas have done more for the development of music than the lands that would go on to become modern-day Germany. Somebody who would likely agree with my assessment of Germany would be Felix Richter, who hails from the real-world town of Coburg, which is a Bavarian town in Upper Franconia. Coburg would most likely be most famous for its close proximity to Nuremberg, which is a much larger town. Germany isn't the only European power to get a DBD survivor, however, as we also got Elodie Ricotto, who comes from the land of baguettes, revolutions, and rats that sit atop your head and help to make you a better chef. That's right, Elodie is French, even though technically her heritage is Malagasy. Tragically, Elodie is Parisian, and I think we all owe it to her to not hold that against her. France, on the whole, is a very cool place, and while Paris isn't my cup of tea, I'm sure Elodie is just great. But what's greater than great? How about a nation so incredible they had to put great in the name just so everybody would know? That's right, we now move to the UK, and more specifically, Great Britain, where we find the home of one David King. A rough and tumble scrapper, David is from Manchester, a medium-sized city of just over 500k residents, which I hope you know is, yes, a real place. Apparently, they play a lot of football in Manchester, but during my Google search, I could only find pictures of guys playing soccer, so I don't know. Another European nation to receive some love is Sweden, which of course was created by Felix Kjellberg back in 2010, so it is a pretty young nation. Sweden is known for beautiful geography, popular brands like IKEA, and commonly being ranked as one of the best places to live on the planet, which is pretty neat. For DBD fans, however, Sweden is known for being the birthplace of Nea Karlsson, who grew up in U. It's the town's name, not U, like Y-O-U. This is another real place, and that's pretty cool. While on the subject of Scandinavia, it's also worth noting that Jeff, though Canadian, is of Norwegian descent, and that is mentioned in his bio. Now it's time to talk about everyone's favorite European nation, China. I'm American, don't bully me, we don't do geography. Now, as already mentioned, Ada Wong is an American of Chinese descent, but there's a character who takes it a step further and is a full-on Chinese citizen. Sadly, to name this character would get me in trouble with some in the audience who think I'm trying to be a, quote, good Twitter boy, and that's no fun. So instead, let's talk about how you arrange your living room furniture, specifically honing in on the feng shui. Because everybody knows about feng shui and how you pronounce it as feng shui, and nobody on earth would look at you funny for saying feng shui. I mean, it's pronounced feng shui. Just say feng shui. So yeah, Feng Min is from China. We'll stay in Asia for this next one, hopping over to India to celebrate Hattie Carr, who moved to Canada at a young age but was born in India. Or at least, I think that's how it played out. It's obvious that she was raised with great emphasis on Indian culture, but it's unclear whether she was born in Quebec or India. Still, I'm going to choose to believe that she was born in Punjab because I'm not going back to edit this script again. This has already taken way too long. So yeah, Hattie is Punjabi, and I think that's really cool. Indian culture is complex and a little hard to grasp from the outside looking in, but at some point I'd like to dig a little deeper because I know that would be a rewarding experience. Finally, we go back out west to cover two areas that I probably should have covered when we were talking about Brazil, but oh well, maybe I'll do that when I revise this list in, let's say, 20 years. We'll start off with Argentina, one of the planet's most naturally beautiful countries, and winners, by the way, of the most recent World Cup, so congrats to them on that. DBD's resident gambler, Ace Visconti, calls Argentina home, and no, I'm not going to look into his Italian heritage because, hey, maybe they migrated to Argentina long before it was cool for certain Italians to move to Argentina. Either way, we don't know where in Argentina Ace was born, so no dice on that. Given his proclivity for gambling and big city living, it's not out of the question that he would be from Buenos Aires, but we can't be sure. Lastly, we arrive at the tropical nation of Jamaica, a place famous for crystal clear waters, high quality coffee, delicious rum, and being such big fans of Chet Hanks, they all started talking like him.
Big up the whole island, massive, it's your boy Chet, nah?
Adam Francis, father of Dead by Daylight's greatest perk, autodidact, is from Jamaica. More specifically, he's from the capital of Kingston. In his lore, he went to Japan for a teaching job, but that doesn't change the fact that he is Jamaican, and judging by some of his cosmetics, proudly so. And that will do it for this recap of where every survivor is from. Did you enjoy it? Was there anything in here that surprised you, or, by the way, that maybe I got wrong? I don't think so, but I'm human, I make mistakes. In a future video, I would like to cover some of the larger countries that haven't, or maybe not even larger, just larger and more interesting countries that haven't received a survivor yet, so keep an eye out for that one in the future. I think that's something I will do at some point, but until then, I've been Das Food. I hope you had a good time, and until the next video, bye friends.
I've been dreaming on in my head like I've seen it. A life worth living is a life with meaning. I'll do what I love till my heart stops beating. I'm feeding this demon. Got a taste, can't erase bitterness in my